Right now, there are $80 billion sitting in an abandoned wallet. They haven't moved for 17 years, but Google has claimed that in 3 years' time, a quantum computer will crack these wallets in 9 minutes. And whilst the whole world argues over who they belong to, the clock is already ticking. My name is Mr. Dark Web. The greatest mystery of the digital age is not who created Bitcoin, but why the creator left 80 billion to rot in a dead wallet. On April 8th, 2026, I opened my morning feed and saw a headline that took my breath away. The New York Times, 12,000 words. Pulitzer Prize winner John Carreyrou, the very man who brought down Elizabeth Holmes's empire and buried Theranos, claimed to have found Satoshi Nakamoto. One name, one person, British cryptographer Adam Back. I've been following this story for a long time. I've studied forum archives and read correspondence that only became public in February 2024 when a London court heard the Craig Wright case. It was then, thanks to the COPA court, that the world first saw the 260 emails written by Satoshi. Real emails, not screenshots from anonymous forums, not third-hand accounts, but genuine messages that early developer Marty Malmi had kept for 13 years and uploaded to GitHub right in the middle of the trial. Adam Back also presented his correspondence with Satoshi to the court. 5 emails, August 2008 to January 2009. And these emails revealed more about the origins of Bitcoin than all previous investigations put together. Carrera spent 18 months sifting through the archives of 3 cryptographic newsletters spanning 16 years, ran 34,000 names through stylometric analysis, and ended up with Beck. But I spent 2 weeks checking every one of his arguments, and the deeper I dug, the more questions I had. Not about Beck, about the investigation itself. To understand why I have my doubts, we need to go right back to the very beginning, to the year 2008, to the moment when the world was teetering on the brink of financial collapse, and a man with no name wrote 9 pages that changed everything. On August 20th, 2008, Adam Back received an email from a stranger. The sender introduced himself as Satoshi Nakamoto. He wrote that he was working on a system of electronic money that did not require a trusted intermediary. He needed the correct reference to Beck's research paper, Hashcash, a proof-of-work system created back in 1997. Beck replied the following day. He also suggested looking into B-Money, a project by another cryptographer, Wei Dai. Satoshi thanked him and admitted that he hadn't known about B-Money before this conversation. Those 5 letters, the only direct correspondence between Satoshi and Beck, were only made public 16 years later, in February 2024, when Beck presented them to a London court as evidence that he was not the creator of Bitcoin. Ironically, 2 years later, those very same letters would become Carreiro's main argument in favor of the claim that Beck is, in fact, Satoshi. But more on that later. The world was falling apart at that moment. Lehman Brothers was just 4 weeks away from collapse, an event that would drag the entire global economy down with it. Governments were preparing to print trillions to rescue the banks that had led the system to disaster. And somewhere amidst this chaos, a faceless figure was quietly putting the final pieces in place of a system designed to render banks obsolete. On August 18th, 2 days before the email to Beck, someone registered the domain bitcoin.org via an anonymous service. On October 31st, exactly 10 weeks later, an email arrived at the cryptography mailing list metsdow.com that would change the course of financial history. 9 pages, title, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. White paper. The document was impeccably written. It displayed an academic style, a clear structure, and elegant solutions to problems that cryptographers have been grappling with for decades. The double spending problem, the trust problem, the decentralization problem. Satoshi solved them all at once, and did so in 9 pages, without a single superfluous word. A subsequent analysis of the PDF file's metadata revealed that the document had been created in OpenOffice, a program that was, at the time, used primarily in academic circles. The timestamp indicated the afternoon in Greenwich Mean Time, British time. Initial reactions were skeptical. The Med-styled mailing list had around 200 subscribers, the world's leading cryptographers. Most didn't believe it. Hal Finney, one of the few who took it seriously, wrote that the idea was interesting but doubted its viability. Nick Szabo, a man who had himself spent years working on a similar concept, BitGold, didn't respond publicly at all. But Satoshi wasn't waiting for approval. He methodically addressed every objection, and his responses revealed a man who had thought the system through down to the smallest detail long before its publication. In one of his posts, he mentioned that he had been working on the code for a year and a half. This meant that the project had begun sometime in the spring of 2007, when no one had yet suspected the impending crisis. Or did he suspect it after all? On January 3rd, 2009, at 1815 Greenwich Mean Time, Block 0 was born, the Genesis block, and what Satoshi embedded within it transformed a technical launch into a political manifesto. Hidden within the code of the first block was a text string. The headline from that morning's edition of the British newspaper The Times: "The Chancellor of the Exchequer is ready to provide banks with a second bailout package." This was not merely proof of the block's creation date. It was a statement, a declaration, a blow to the system that had just brought the global economy to its knees and was now asking taxpayers to foot the bill for its own rescue. The first 50 bitcoins created in the Genesis block cannot be spent. Technically, this is a feature of the code, but many see it as a symbolic gesture. Satoshi sacrificed the first coins to show that he wasn't in it for the money. 6 days passed between the Genesis block and block number 1. Given the network's capacity at the time, the block should have appeared within 10 minutes. 6 days of silence. The official explanation is that Satoshi was testing the system, but no one has ever explained exactly what he was testing for 6 days, when the code was already up and running. On January 12th, an event took place that would go down in Bitcoin history. On block number 9, the first transaction between people, Satoshi sent 10 bitcoins to Hal Finney, a cryptographer, a legend of the cypherpunk movement, and one of the few who believed in the project from the very beginning. Finney later recounted that Satoshi had asked him to run a node and help with testing. Finney agreed. He ran the program, received 10 coins, and posted one of the most prophetic phrases in the history of technology on Twitter: launching Bitcoin. In the early months, Satoshi mined almost entirely on his own. And this is where one of the most important chapters of this story begins. A chapter written not by a journalist or a hacker, but by an Argentine cryptographer. In 2013, researcher Sergio Damian Lerner had discovered an anomaly in the blockchain, which he dubbed the Satoshi pattern. By analyzing the extra nonce fields in early blocks, Lerner identified a unique signature belonging to a single miner who had mined around 22,000 blocks during the network's first year of existence. 1,100,000 bitcoins. 5% of all coins that will ever exist. But Lerner discovered something even stranger. This miner, presumably Satoshi, used specialized software that was not included in the public version of the Bitcoin client. Satoshi had been using multi-threaded mining, a feature that would not appear in the open source code until 2010. From day one, he had given himself a technical advantage, but not in order to make more money. Lerner discovered that Satoshi had deliberately reduced his hash rate in several stages over the course of the first year. Every time a new miner joined the network, Satoshi gave way to them. He would switch off his equipment for 5 minutes after every block he found, so that others could get their share. He limited himself to 1 or 2% of the available hash rate, leaving 98% for new participants. This behavior made no economic sense. Why would anyone voluntarily reduce their own income? Why give ground to competitors? The answer reached by the researchers is alarmingly simple. Satoshi wasn't earning, he was protecting. He kept the network afloat during its most vulnerable months, when a 51% attack could have killed Bitcoin in a single day. And once the network had grown stronger, he began to step back. By February 2009, several more people had joined the mining network. Satoshi wrote to each of them personally, explaining the settings. From the emails published by Malami, it is clear that Satoshi regarded the early participants as fellow campaigners. He discussed the interface, sought applications for the new currency, and thought about how to attract the first users. In one of his letters to Malami, he wrote a sentence that sounds almost like a startup business plan. We need to find a niche where Bitcoin will be more useful than existing solutions. But alongside this human, almost entrepreneurial side, another side emerged. Satoshi was paranoidly cautious. The IP addresses he used were constantly changing. He used Tor. He never revealed anything personal. Over 2 years of activity, around 80,000 words in forums, emails, and code comments, and not a single clue as to who he was, where he lived, or what he did. Not a single typo. In 2 years, 80,000 words, and not a single accidental mistake. That's statistically impossible. Either every post was carefully proofread, or it went through an editor. By the end of 2009, Bitcoin was worth a fraction of a cent. A few dozen enthusiasts. No media attention. No interest from the authorities. Just as Satoshi had intended, he wrote that the project needed to grow gradually so that the software could have time to become robust. Quiet growth, until the system became too big to stop. But the silence could not last forever, and what happened next forced Satoshi Nakamoto to make a decision whose consequences we are still feeling today. Everyone leaves traces, even those who desperately try to hide them. Over the course of 2 years of activity, Satoshi Nakamoto wrote around 80,000 words in forums, emails, and code comments, enough to create a linguistic portrait of him. And it is precisely this portrait that, 15 years later, would become the main weapon in the hands of a New York Times journalist. But before Carrero, there were others, and they noticed a great deal. The first thing that caught my eye was the British English. In one of his early forum posts, he used the expression bloody hard, an idiom not typically used by Americans. But there was something odd. In about 3% of cases, Americanism slipped through. It was as if the author was used to writing in one style, but sometimes forgot himself. Or conversely, he was deliberately disguising himself, and the mask sometimes slipped. The times of activity provided another clue. An analysis of 742 timestamps from Satoshi's posts and emails revealed a clear pattern. He almost never went online between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. This corresponded to nighttime in Britain or the early morning on the US East Coast. Activity peaked in the evening London time and at weekends, particularly on Saturdays. But an analysis of the 260 Malmi emails published in 2024 revealed something else. The timestamps perfectly matched the working hours of someone living in an American time zone and posing as a Briton. One of the researchers suggested that Satoshi had deliberately set the system time to Greenwich Mean Time to cover his tracks. The code also bore traces of his background. The comments in the source code revealed someone with an academic education. Satoshi referenced obscure works on game theory and cryptography from the 1970s and 1980s. He used terminology rarely encountered outside academic circles. The code structure was neat, but not perfect. Some solutions looked like the work of a brilliant theorist, rather than a professional developer. On Darknet forums, people are still debating whether the code was written by one person or several. The pattern of errors suggests a single author, but stylistic shifts, short, choppy phrases when discussing cryptography, and long academic constructions when discussing economics leave room for doubt. But the real breakthrough in linguistic analysis did not come until April 2026, when Carrero and Dylan Friedman, the New York Times' AI projects editor, compiled a dataset of 134,308 posts from 3 cryptography mailing lists, cypherpunks, cryptography, and hashcash, covering the period from 1992 to 2008. 620 active participants discussing digital money. 3 independent methods of analysis. Carrera applied a series of filters: 2 spaces after a full stop, British spelling, inconsistent use of email and email, confusion between its and its, specific errors in the use of hyphens in compound words. Each filter narrowed the field. 20 candidates, 8, 1. Only one person out of 620 reproduced all these characteristics simultaneously, alternating check and check, e-cash and electronic cash, optimize and optimize in the same patterns as Satoshi. Adam Back. He also accounted for 67 of Satoshi's 325 unique hyphenation errors. His nearest rival had 38. A separate stylometric analysis was carried out by Florian Cafiero, a French computational linguist who had previously helped the New York Times identify the authors behind the QAnon movement. Cafiero identified Beck as the closest match to the authorial style of the white paper among the 12 main suspects. However, he himself acknowledged that the result was inconclusive. Hal Finney came second by a narrow margin, and this is where the problem lies. Stylometry is a powerful tool, but it only works one way. It can reveal similarities. It cannot prove authorship, especially when it comes to a group of people who have been in the same bubble for decades, reading the same articles, using the same terminology, discussing the same issues on the same mailing lists. As Bruce Schneier, one of the world's most respected cryptographers, wrote a few days after the publication, compare writing styles, and you'll find similarities. Compare programming styles, and you'll see 2 completely different people. But Carriero found something beyond linguistics, and it was precisely that something that really got me thinking. Adam Back has been one of the most active contributors to cryptography mailing lists since the early 1990s. A seasoned cypherpunk, the creator of Hashcash, the proof-of-work system upon which all Bitcoin mining is based, the man whose work Satoshi cited in the white paper, and to whom he wrote the first known letter 2 months before its publication. For years, Back discussed electronic money, privacy, and decentralization. He was part of the world from which Bitcoin emerged. And here's what Carrera discovered. During the period when Satoshi was most active, from late 2008 to April of 2011, Beck fell silent completely. The man who, for years, had been one of the most prolific contributors to discussions about digital money suddenly stopped posting. Not a single post, not a single comment, and he reappeared 6 weeks after Satoshi had left for good. 6 weeks. Satoshi posted his last known public message in December 2010. His last private email was to Mike Hearn on April 23, 2011. And in June, Beck mentioned Bitcoin publicly for the first time in 3 years. Carrera does not believe this is a coincidence, but let's pause for a moment. Let's try to think like an investigator, not a journalist. Beck wasn't the only one who fell silent during that period. Dozens of people on cryptography mailing lists stopped posting by the end of the 2000s. The mailing lists died out. The forums moved on. People changed jobs, started families, lost interest. Correlation is not causation. Silence is not an admission. And yet, there was something that wouldn't leave me alone. The letters, those very 5 letters exchanged between Satoshi and Beck in August 2008. Carrera put forward a theory that sounds crazy, but which is impossible to disprove. Beck could have sent these letters to himself. He could have created a correspondence between his real name and his pseudonym to establish an alibi for the future. "Look," he would say, "a stranger wrote to me. I didn't even know about his project." I simply replied to the letter. There is no evidence to support this theory. Beck provided the court with the content of the correspondence, but refused to disclose the metadata, the technical headers of the emails, which could have confirmed or refuted whether the sender and recipient were different people. Carrera pointed this out. So did the crypto community. But here's what gave me pause. I reread these letters several times. The tone. Satoshi writes to Beku as if he were a stranger, polite, slightly hesitant, with respect for his senior colleague. He asks for the correct link to Hashcash. He thanks him for the advice to look into B-Money. He admits that he didn't know about Weidai's project. If this is a charade, it's on a level that requires not just intelligence, but acting talent. You'd have to write a letter to yourself in which you pretend not to know about work you know by heart, and keep that letter for 16 years without ever letting it slip. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? I'm not sure. There was another point that Carrero considered significant. In 2025, Beck founded the Bitcoin Standard Treasury Company, BSTR. It had 30,000 Bitcoins on its balance sheet, a deal with Cantor Equity Partners, the company owned by Brandon Lutnick, son of Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. The company was preparing to list on the NASDAQ. And here's the paradox. If Bach is indeed Satoshi, then he has another 1.1 million Bitcoins lying around somewhere. Under U.S. securities law, when going public, he is obliged to disclose information that is material to investors. Secret control over 5% of all Bitcoin is certainly material information. Carrero sees this as a trap that will snap shut sooner or later. I see something else. Why would a man who has kept his identity perfectly hidden for 17 years voluntarily go public, where every document is scrutinized by regulators? It is either the height of audacity, or proof that Beck is not Satoshi and has nothing to hide. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. And to understand this, we need to look at those who tried to solve this mystery before Carrero, and at how each of them failed. In December 2010, WikiLeaks announced that it was ready to accept donations in Bitcoin. Prior to this, Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal had blocked all payments to Julian Assange's organization at the request of the US government. Bitcoin remained the only channel that could not be shut down. And that is precisely why Satoshi was horrified. On the Bitcoin Talk forum, in response to a user who had enthusiastically welcomed the attention from WikiLeaks, Satoshi wrote a phrase that would later be quoted thousands of times. No, don't do that. Bitcoin is a small beta community in its infancy. You won't make any more pocket money, and the attention you attract will most likely destroy us at this stage. A week later, on December 11th, he posted his final public message. WikiLeaks has stirred up a hornet's nest, and the swarm is heading our way. 13 words. After that, Satoshi Nakamoto fell silent on the forums for good. On December 12th, he released the latest technical update, version 0.3.19. A terse message: more work is needed on protection against DOS attacks. No farewell, no explanations, just silence. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. From Malmi's letters, which were made public in 2024, it is clear that in the final weeks, Satoshi began to hand over his authority. Methodically, yet hastily. He handed over the cryptographic keys to the alert system. He removed his name from the copyright notice on the official website. He began to cover his tracks. On April 20th, 2011, Gavin Andresen, Bitcoin's lead developer after Satoshi, announced that he was traveling to the CIA headquarters in Langley to give a presentation on the new technology. He wanted to legitimize the project and demonstrate that Bitcoin was not a tool for criminals. Satoshi saw it differently. On 23rd of April, he sent his last known email to developer Mike Hearn. It was brief and calm. I've moved on to other things. Bitcoin is in good hands with Gavin and all of you. But there was a second part which Hearn only revealed in 2016. Satoshi had asked not to turn him into a mysterious figure because it would only harm the project. A request that the world ignored completely. After 23rd April, there was silence. Accounts were frozen. Messages ceased. 1,100,000 Bitcoins lay dormant across 50,000 addresses. The cleanest disappearance in the history of the internet. Not a single trace, not a single farewell, just code that continued to run without its creator, and the search began immediately. Over the course of 15 years spent hunting for Satoshi Nakamoto, dozens of journalists, hackers, and cryptanalysts have spent thousands of hours on the quest. Each believed they had come closest to the truth. Each was wrong, but their mistakes were different, and each revealed more about the mystery of Satoshi than any correct answer ever could. The most absurd episode took place in March 2014. Newsweek journalist Leah Goodman tracked down a 64-year-old Japanese-American engineer named Dorian Prentice Satoshi Nakamoto in the suburbs of Los Angeles. That's his real name. A real person. When asked about Bitcoin, he replied with a phrase that Newsweek interpreted as an admission. He said he was no longer involved in it, that he had handed it over to other people. Later, Dorian explained that he had been referring to his previous engineering work for military contractors. But it was too late. Journalists besieged his home. Cameras, microphones, a car chase. The poor man became a hostage to his own name. 6 months later, in September 2014, something inexplicable happened. Satoshi's email account, which had been silent for 3 years, came back to life. 4 words: "I am not Dorian Nakamoto." Who sent this message? Satoshi himself, stepping out of the shadows to defend an innocent man? A hacker who had gained access to his email? It has never been established, but the message did its job. Next came Craig Wright, an Australian scientist who, in December 2015, found himself at the center of simultaneous investigations by Wired and Gizmodo. Leaked documents, emails, and blog posts all pointed to Wright. A few hours after the publication, the Australian Taxation Office raided his home. Wright embraced the role of Satoshi with enthusiasm. In May 2016, he staged a proof for several journalists and Gavin Anderson, signing a message with a key from an early block. Anderson believed him, but when experts demanded a public demonstration, Wright refused, citing emotional pressure. The crypto community dubbed him Fakatoshi. But Wright's story did not end there. It dragged on for 8 years and led to one of the most significant court cases in the history of cryptocurrency. In February 2024, the COPA Crypto Open Patent Alliance trial against Craig Wright began in London. The alliance of major crypto companies sought to prevent Wright from claiming authorship of Bitcoin, and it was this trial that gave the world what everyone had been waiting for 15 years: Satoshi's own words. Marty Malmi, a Finnish developer and the first administrator of Bitcoin.org, has uploaded 260 emails to GitHub that he had kept in his archives for 13 years. These are genuine exchanges with Satoshi, dating from May 2009 to early 2011. Adam Back has also shared his 5 emails. Cryptographers now have more material to analyze than they have had in the entire previous decade. And Wright? The court picked him apart. The PGP keys he presented as evidence turned out to have been created retrospectively. In 2014, not 2008, the blog post had been edited after the fact. An animation presented by COPA's lawyers showed, frame by frame, how Wright attempted to recreate the white paper in LaTeX, a system in which the original had never been created. Judge Mallard delivered his verdict on March 24th. Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and his documents are forgeries. There were other candidates too. Nick Szabo, the creator of the BitGold concept, a precursor to Bitcoin. The linguistic similarities with Satoshi's writings were striking. Both used double spaces after full stops. Both wrote about the problem of trusted intermediaries. Szabo fell silent about BitGold immediately after Bitcoin's launch, but he is a public figure, active on social media, the complete opposite of a paranoid ghost. And here's a curious fact. Satoshi claimed he knew nothing about BitGold until he was told about it after the white paper was published. Hal Finney was the first person to receive a transaction from Satoshi. He lived just a few blocks away from Dorian Nakamoto, a coincidence that still baffles researchers. Finney died in 2014 from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Before his death, he had his body cryonically preserved, hoping for resurrection in the future. His cryptographic keys were also frozen alongside his body. In 2024, HBO released the documentary Money Electric: The Bitcoin Mystery, which identified Peter Todd, a Canadian Bitcoin core developer, as the person in question. Todd denied the allegations. The crypto community reacted to the film with irritation, but it was this very film, according to Carrero himself, that triggered his own investigation. The journalist watched the documentary, decided the evidence was weak, and thought, what if I could do better? 18 months later, the New York Times published a 12,000-word article pointing the finger at Adam Beck. Carrero is no amateur. He is the man who brought down the $9 billion company Theranos through the power of investigative journalism, 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 20 years at the Wall Street Journal, a Franco-American who grew up in Paris and was educated at Duke University. When he takes on a subject, he doesn't back down, and the scale of his work on Satoshi is truly impressive. 18 months, 16 years worth of archives from 3 newsletters, 134,000 posts, 34,000 names, 3 independent methods of linguistic analysis, collaboration with AI editor Dylan Friedman, and computational linguist Florian Cafiero, who previously uncovered the authors of QAnon. This is the most ambitious attempt to identify Satoshi ever undertaken, and yet, I spent 2 weeks picking apart Carrera's arguments one by one, and here's what I found. The first problem is the methodology. Carrero selected the filters he applied to the pool of candidates, already knowing which characteristics belonged to Satoshi and which to Beck. The process was not blind. The researchers knew who they were looking for before they began their search. As one critic wrote, if you start with a suspect and look for matches, you will find them. Every prolific author has unique habits. The procedure would only carry weight if it had been conducted blindly. There is no evidence that this was the case. The second problem is that Carrero's own linguist disagrees with him. Florian Cafiero described the results of his stylometric analysis as inconclusive. Hal Finney, a deceased cryptographer whose body lies in a cryogenic chamber, was in second place, trailing by a narrow margin. Cafiero had previously attempted to identify Satoshi himself and failed. He acknowledged that errors in hyphens and grammatical peculiarities are harder to explain away as mere coincidence. But this is far from proof. The third problem is the private key. There's a foolproof way to prove that you're Satoshi. Sign a message using the private key from the Genesis block or block number 9. 1 transaction, 1 signature, and the whole world would know the truth within 10 minutes. Carrera has no such proof. He has dashes, spaces, and silence. Satoshi has 1,100,000 coins that could put an end to the debate with a single click. But there's no end, and that perhaps speaks louder than any linguistic analysis. Problem number 4 is motive. Immediately after the article was published, a question arose on Darknet forums and within the crypto community that Carrera had failed to ask. Who stands to gain from Back being revealed as Satoshi right now? BSTR's listing on NASDAQ, 30,000 bitcoins, a partnership with Cantor Fitzgerald, the son of the US Secretary of Commerce on the board of directors. If Back is Satoshi, the company faces the threat of regulatory pressure. If Back is not Satoshi, the NYT article gives him the reputation of a figure on the scale of Satoshi without any legal risks. In both cases, BSTR gets free PR across the globe. I'm not claiming that this was planned. I am saying that the investigator has a duty to ask this question, and Carrera did not ask it. Beck reacted swiftly. On the very same day, he posted on social media, "I am not Satoshi." He described the investigation as an example of confirmation bias. He explained that his long-standing presence in the same mailing lists, where the same topics were discussed, inevitably leads to linguistic similarities. People with similar experiences, interests, and education write in a similar way. This is not proof. It is statistical noise. In an interview with Yahoo Finance the following day, he added a remark which, in my view, was the most powerful. I think the real Satoshi is someone who doesn't speak to journalists, doesn't attend conferences, and doesn't appear in documentaries. Yet, Beck had been doing all of that for years. He gave speeches, he gave interviews, he sat in front of the camera, time and time again. Would the real Satoshi take such a risk? Nicholas Gregory, an early member of the Bitcoin community from the UK, put it more succinctly. If Beck is Satoshi, we must acknowledge the incredible efforts he has made to ensure that no one thinks so. In that case, we must respect his wish to remain anonymous. Bruce Schneier, one of the world's most respected cryptographers, published a critique a few days later. "The article is rubbish," he wrote. "Compare their writing styles, and you'll find similarities. Compare their programming styles, and you'll see two completely different people." Schneier added, "The only real proof is to transfer one Satoshi to the specified wallet. Everything else is circumstantial evidence. Carrera has come closer than anyone else in 17 years. His investigation is the most extensive, the most methodical, and the most expensive in the history of the search for Satoshi. And yet, it is still not enough, because there's only one way to prove that you are Satoshi Nakamoto: to sign a message with your private key. And until that happens, the mystery remains a mystery." 1,100,000 Bitcoins. 5% of all coins that will ever exist. They sit in 50,000 addresses, untouched since 2010. At current exchange rates, that's over $80 billion. Not a single transaction, not a single movement. 17 years of absolute silence. But this silence may not last forever. In April 2026, just a few days before Carrero's publication, Fortune published an article that went almost unnoticed amid the hype surrounding Beck. A Google report, quantum computing. According to the researchers' calculations, by 2029, a sufficiently powerful quantum computer will be able to crack the cryptographic protection of early Bitcoin wallets in 9 minutes. Satoshi wallets are among the most vulnerable. They use an outdated key format that is not protected against quantum attacks. There are 6.9 million Bitcoins in such wallets. The community is already discussing the BIP 360 proposal, the transition to quantum-resistant cryptography. But there is a problem. If the update becomes mandatory with a deadline, all wallets that do not switch to the new format will effectively be frozen. Satoshi's coins will be among the first to be affected. Burn them? Leave them as they are and hope for the best. Redistribute them? Each option risks splitting the community. J.P. Richardson of Exodus, an early Bitcoin advocate, acknowledged that if nothing is done, the coins in old addresses, including Satoshi's, will sooner or later be claimed by whoever is the first to gain access to a quantum computer. Pete Rizzo, a Bitcoin historian, attended the closed-door Satoshi Roundtable meeting in February and heard calls to make the upgrade mandatory. However, he described this position as a minority view. It is mainly market players who are concerned with price rather than principles. Meanwhile, on March the 5th, 2026, an event occurred that sent shockwaves through the entire crypto market. A Satoshi-era wallet, an address created in the early months of Bitcoin's existence, suddenly came to life. 2,000 coins, nearly $180 million at the exchange rate on that day. The first movement from this address since 2024, crypto quant analyst Julio Moreno noted that historically, such transfers from Satoshi-era wallets occur around major market turning points. The coins did not end up on exchanges. Most likely, this is consolidation, a move to a new address for security. But the very fact that someone from the earliest circle still controls their keys has made the market nervous. And here's another detail that most people missed. Around the same time the world was discussing Carrera and Beck, Admiral Samuel Paparo, head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, told 2 congressional committees that the U.S. military had launched its own node on the Bitcoin network to test cybersecurity. The protocol that Satoshi created as an alternative to government-issued money is now running on Pentagon servers. I began this investigation with a simple question: who is Satoshi Nakamoto? But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this was the wrong question. I asked the right question at the start of this story. Why did Bitcoin's creator leave 80 billion in a dormant wallet? Because that was the whole point. Bitcoin was conceived as a leaderless system, without a founder who could be arrested, bribed, or intimidated, without a central figure to whom a summons could be served. Satoshi didn't simply disappear, he turned his absence into a design feature. A protocol with no creator cannot be stopped. Money that its creator has renounced cannot be confiscated. And what about the coins? 1,100,000 Bitcoins isn't wealth. It's the foundation, 5% of the total supply, permanently removed from circulation. An artificial scarcity built into the system by its creator, the most expensive sacrifice in the history of finance. But the clock is ticking. Quantum computers, regulators, bounty hunters, and somewhere in the world, perhaps in London, perhaps in California, perhaps in a place no one suspects, there's a man who knows the answer. If he is still alive, if the keys still exist, if $80 billion is not a digital monument, but a time bomb. Carrera came closest of all, but the private key remains silent. And as long as it remains silent, Satoshi Nakamoto remains a phantom. As always, yours sincerely, Mr. Dark Web. Over the last 8 months, one person has lost $70 billion. They haven't sold a single coin, haven't written a single word, haven't done anything at all, because this person perhaps does not exist. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I will answer a question that the wrong people have been asking for 15 years. The question isn't who Satoshi Nakamoto is. The question is who holds the keys to his billions. There have already been 7 videos about Satoshi on this channel. I've analyzed candidates, from Hal Finney to Nick Szabo. I've analyzed the New York Times investigation that blew up the crypto community. I've analyzed why he will never be found. And all this time, like thousands of researchers before me, I was looking in the wrong place. We were looking for a face, a name, a human being. But we should have been doing what any investigator does in any big money case. Follow the money. You pushed me toward this. Under every video about Satoshi, the same questions have been piling up for years. Is it true that his wallets are controlled by American military intelligence? Is it true that the keys are split between several people? And the most frequent question of the last year, is it true that a quantum computer will soon crack these wallets without any keys? I brushed it off. I considered them theories for the comment section. And then, in early May, I stumbled upon something in the blockchain data that forced me to set aside all other topics. More on that later. Everything in its own time. First, you need to understand what kind of money we are even talking about, and why this money is unlike any other money on the planet. On October 31st, 2008, at 2:10 in the afternoon New York time, an email arrived on a closed cryptography mailing list. 9 pages of text, the sender, a certain Satoshi Nakamoto, using an address from a free anonymous service. The first line of the email sounded mundane. I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party. To understand why anyone even opened this email, you have to remember what was happening outside. 6 weeks prior, Lehman Brothers had collapsed. 158 years of history. $613 billion in debt. Governments were dousing the fire with taxpayer money. Trust in banks, in regulators, in the entire financial architecture of the planet was burning faster than they could put it out. And at that moment, an anonymous figure offers money that doesn't need banks. The cryptographers on the list met the idea with skepticism. They had seen dozens of such projects, and all dozens had died. But Satoshi didn't argue for long. He did what sets him apart from all his predecessors. He simply launched the system. On January 3rd, 2009, the first block of Bitcoin was created. It is called the Genesis block, and inside it, Satoshi embedded a message that today is known by heart by anyone who has ever taken an interest in cryptocurrencies. The headline of the London newspaper The Times from that day: Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. This isn't just a timestamp, it is a motive carved in stone. The creator himself explained what he was building his machine against. I'll make a short stop here. Remember one detail, it will come into play later. The first block is technically structured differently than all the subsequent ones. The reward from it, 50 coins, is impossible to spend by anyone, ever. Whether this is an accident or a deliberate decision, no one knows. But it turns out that the very first money of the new system was walled off by Satoshi himself. On January 9th, he released the software for anyone interested. There were only a handful of people interested. The network was held up by practically one computer, and that computer belonged to the creator himself. On January 12th, the first transaction in history happened. Satoshi sent 10 coins to programmer Hal Finney, a legend of the cryptographic community, one of the few who believed in the project from day one. Those 10 coins were worth nothing back then. Zero. Just a line in a database that two enthusiasts were passing between their machines. Throughout the entire year of 2009, the system lived in total obscurity. The coin had no price. There was simply nothing to buy with it. The first exchange rate appeared only in October, and it was set by an enthusiast who calculated the cost of electricity for mining. It turned out $1 for 1,309 bitcoins, not the other way around. A dollar was worth 1,309 coins. At that rate, Satoshi's future fortune could have been bought for the price of a used laptop. And while the world didn't notice his creation, Satoshi himself worked. The archives show how he wrote code, answered on the forum, fixed vulnerabilities, argued about technical solutions, hundreds of messages, a steady, polite, impersonal tone. Over 2 years of active correspondence, he never once mentioned his age, his country, the weather outside, or fatigue. Researchers would later plot a graph of his message times, trying to calculate at least his time zone when this person sleeps. The graph showed something strange. It was as if he didn't sleep at all. In February, Satoshi wrote a phrase on a forum that explains his project better than any white paper. The root problem with conventional currencies is all the trust that's required to make them work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. There it is, the manifesto. Not to earn, not to get rich. To remove trust in people and replace it with mathematics. To understand how much of a toy this mathematics looked like back then. In May of 2010, a year and a half after launch, a programmer from Florida made the first purchase in history with bitcoins. 2 pizzas, 10,000 coins. In today's money, $600 million. People on the forum laughed at the deal back then. Satoshi didn't write a word about it. Judging by the archives, the price of the coin didn't interest him at all. In none of his hundreds of messages is there a word about the exchange rate, profit, or investments. A creator of money who is indifferent to money. And this is where the strangeness begins. The reason we are all here. A person who trusted no one mined a treasure in the first year that is today, valued at tens of billions of dollars. And then he did something with this treasure that no one in the history of money has ever done. He didn't touch it. At all. Not once. But how do we even know how many coins Satoshi has? He didn't publish addresses. He didn't brag about his balance. He didn't leave a will. One person from Argentina found the answer to this question. And what he discovered in 2013 turned 1 million faceless coins into evidence. In April of 2013, Argentine cryptographer Sergio Demian Lerner was sitting over the raw data of the first year of Bitcoin's life. He was interested in a boring, purely technical question: exactly how the earliest blocks were mined. To do this, he looked at a service field inside the blocks. the so-called extra nonce, a counter that the mining software increments during the process, a field that no one had ever paid attention to, garbage data, digital dust. In this dust, learners saw a pattern. For all miners, the counter behaved as expected, chaotically, with resets, with jagged jumps, but one miner stood out. His counter grew in neat, continuous lines, block after block, week after week. As if among a crowd of people walking through snow in a disorganized way, one person was walking in a perfectly straight line of footprints. Lerner nicknamed this miner Satoshi, and he began counting his blocks. The result was mind-boggling. About 22,000 blocks during the first year of the network, 50 coins per block. Total, approximately 1,100,000 bitcoins. One miner, one machine with a characteristic signature. Almost 5% of all the coins that will ever exist. And this miner worked from the very first day. The Satoshi pattern starts right from the Genesis block. A conclusion that is impossible to dodge. Satoshi is Satoshi. The creator of the system was also its primary miner. The community met Lerner's discovery with hostility. He was accused of undermining Bitcoin's reputation. It turned out that the people's money was half owned by one anonymous person. They tried to prove to him that the pattern could have been left by several synchronized miners. An early pool, a coincidence. Lerner methodically dismantled every objection. The blocks of the pattern are linked together in a way that only one machine, continuing its own work, could link them. They only argued about the size of the hoard. Some studies lowered the estimate to 700,000 coins. Others confirmed 1,100,000. But the main dispute ended. One participant, one signature, a giant share of the first year. Today, analytical companies like Arkham, which track the wallets of governments and billionaires, officially keep track of Satoshi's fortune based on the Satoshi pattern, more than 22,000 addresses, each with a neat 50 coins, like soldiers in formation. It would seem the story couldn't be simpler. A genius created money, and the first thing he did was hoard it for himself. Sounds logical, almost too logical, because later, Lerner and the researchers who continued his work saw things in the pattern that break this version over their knee. The Satoshi miner didn't behave like a gold digger. He behaved like a guard. When new participants came into the network and the total power grew, Satoshi lowered his own. He made room. He mined less than he could have. From time to time, he stopped altogether, shutting down for hours and days, as if checking whether the network would survive without him, whether the child would withstand its first steps without his father's hand. Researcher Jameson Lopp, who spent years digging into this data, put it bluntly. It looks like this miner was concerned about the stability of the network, not personal gain. In the first year, Bitcoin was an infant. One attacker with a couple of powerful computers could have seized more than half of the total power, rewritten the history of transactions, and killed the idea in the cradle. Satoshi's million coins are not a treasure. They are a byproduct of protection. Satoshi kept his machine running so that his creation would survive its childhood, and every 50 coins mined were not a reward, but a bullet in the Defender's magazine. A beautiful picture, isn't it? A selfless guardian at the cradle of new money. And I would have been touched at this point and closed the topic. But I looked at how the pattern ends. In May of 2010, the Satoshi pattern cuts off. The machine shuts down. Forever. Analysts at the company Whale Alert, who re-verified Lerner's data 10 years later, confirmed after May of 2010, the characteristic signature disappears from the blockchain. By that time, the network had grown stronger, and there were enough other miners. The guard considered his shift finished. Here's a figure that replaces 10 arguments. Almost 16 years have passed since that day. In that time, Bitcoin has gone from $0 to $126,000 per coin. At its peak, Satoshi's fortune was worth $138 billion, the 11th spot among the richest people on the planet, higher than most living billionaires on the Forbes list. The number of outgoing transactions from his 22,000 addresses over all these years is zero. Not a single sale at the peak. Not a single transfer to heirs. Not a single coin to charity. 10 coins to Hal Finney in January 2009. The only movement in its entire history. And that was done before this money had any value at all. People have lost their minds over 1,000th of that sum. Here, there is dead silence. You might say perhaps the owner is just waiting for an even higher price. Then look at the last few months. In October, Bitcoin stood at an all-time high. By the beginning of summer, it had collapsed by more than a third to 60-something thousand per coin. Satoshi's fortune shrank by $70 billion over 8 months, from 138 to 68. In the ranking of the world's richest people, the ghost slid from 11th place to 20th, letting Bill Gates pass him by. Any living person would have at least cashed out a portion at the peak. Any heir, any manager, any thief with stolen keys would have sold at least something. Here, nothing was sold. This money behaves as if, to its owner, it was never money at all. Silence is the primary piece of evidence. Because there are only a few explanations for silence. The owner does not want to touch the money. The owner cannot touch it. Or the owner is no longer here, and the keys are lying somewhere no one has thought to look yet. Before we break down these versions, we need to answer the question you're already asking. Where did Satoshi himself go? Because he didn't just turn off his miner in May 2010. 6 months after that, he began to erase himself from the world. Methodically, step by step, like a man covering his tracks. And just before his disappearance, he committed an act that, 15 years later, I will analyze as the key piece of evidence in this case. He handed over power over Bitcoin to another person, and that person soon headed to CIA headquarters. On December 5th, 2010, Satoshi Nakamoto lost his composure for the first time in 2 years. The forum was discussing the news. The organization WikiLeaks, which had been blocked from receiving donations by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal, was planning to accept Bitcoins. The community was jubilant. This was it, recognition, the first high-profile client. And then the creator entered the discussion. No, don't do this, he wrote. The project is too small. The network won't withstand such attention. I am appealing to WikiLeaks. Do not use Bitcoin. This is a small, nascent beta community. He wasn't heard. A week later, on December 12th, Satoshi wrote on the forum again, and that message became the last public one of his life. It contained a phrase that is cited today as an epitaph. WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest, and the swarm is heading toward us. The next day, December 13th, he logged onto the forum for the last time. He didn't write anything. He just looked and logged out forever. After that, he acted like a man following an evacuation protocol. Over the following months, Satoshi handed programmer Gavin Anderson the cryptographic key to the network's emergency alert system, essentially the creator's last lever of power over his own creation. On April 23, 2011, developer Mike Hearn received a private email from him. The last known email from Satoshi Nakamoto. 2 thoughts, 0 emotion. I have moved on to other things. Bitcoin is in the safe hands of Gavin and the others. And now, a chronology that will make your skin crawl. A few days after that email, Gavin Anderson publicly announced on the forum he had been invited to give a presentation on Bitcoin at the CIA, not at a university, not at a conference. At the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Gavin went. And it was during those very days that Satoshi went silent for good, cutting off even private correspondence with those he had spoken to for years. A coincidence? Perhaps. But remember this alignment of dates. We will return to it when we analyze who might hold the keys. Satoshi disappeared perfectly. Not a single photograph remained. Not a single voice recording. Not a single verifiable fact of his biography. 15 years of hunting by the world's best journalists, cryptographers, and intelligence agencies, and 0. But, I repeat, I am not interested in him. I am interested in his money, and this is where the story I promised you at the very beginning begins. The story of my May discovery. In early May, I was sitting in an analytical platform that tracks the movement of old coins, rechecking data for a completely different video, and I saw a fresh mark. An address from 2009 had woken up. The Satoshi era, the earliest generation of coins. My heart skipped a beat. Anyone who works in this field has a reflex for such marks, because there had already been a precedent, and what a precedent it was. On July 4th, 2025, on the Independence Day of the United States, the largest awakening in Bitcoin's history occurred. 8 wallets that had been sleeping for 14 years came to life in a single night. 80,000 coins, almost $9 billion at the exchange rate at the time. The coins had landed in those addresses in April and May of 2011, in the exact weeks when Satoshi was writing his farewell letter. The total purchase had cost the owner less than $210,000 at the time, a return of about 4 million%. The crypto world went wild. Satoshi has returned. The headline screamed, Satoshi is selling. Satoshi is alive. And now, almost a year later, an even older address wakes up. I dropped everything. For a week, I lived in the blockchain data. I pulled the address history, verified timestamps, searched for links to other early wallets, and built chains. The address was a true veteran. The coins landed there in the summer of 2009, when there were only a few dozen people in the entire network. Everything fit. The age, the era, the signature of early mining. I was already mentally writing the script for a video titled Satoshi Has Stirred, and calculating how I would apologize to those commenters I'd spent years convincing that he would never return. And then I did what I should have done on the first day. I opened Lerner's work and compared the blocks of that address with the Satoshi pattern. A miss. The externance was jagged, the intervals chaotic, no link to the pattern blocks. Just an ordinary early miner, one of those dozens of enthusiasts who ran the program on home machines alongside Satoshi. Not him again. I spent a week and hit a wall that hundreds of researchers had hit before me. The trail had gone cold. I was already about to drop the topic, and then it hit me. The thing that made losing that week worth it. I had checked awakenings before. The 80,000 from July. They were also run through the Lerner pattern in the first few days, and they were also a miss. That miner started working when Satoshi's machine had already been silent for a year. The awakening of 3,900 coins at the end of July, a miss. The 150 coins of a veteran from 2009, a miss. And my May address, a miss. I wrote down all the major awakenings of old wallets from recent years in one column. And I saw a pattern that truly made me feel uneasy. Everyone wakes up. Sooner or later, everyone. Veterans from 2009, whales from 2011, the lost and the found, heirs and thieves. Old coins across the network come to life regularly. Dozens of addresses a year. Greed, death, need, fear. Something always wakes up any money. It is a law. In 16 years, it has had exactly one exception. 22,000 addresses of the Satoshi pattern, 0 awakenings. Not one. Ever. Do you understand what that means? Satoshi's silence is not just a fact. It is a statistical anomaly of monstrous proportions. 22,000 locks, and not a single one has clicked while all other doors around them are opening. That is not how a living person's money behaves. That is not how heirs' money behaves. That is not how money behaves at all, unless something is happening with the keys that we do not understand. And from this moment on, my question stopped sounding like, who is Satoshi? It started sounding like this. What must happen to the keys to $70 billion so that they don't touch a single lock for 16 years? There are only a few honest answers to this question, and the first one hides in 3 letters you have already heard today. Langley. In the archives of a closed forum I accessed back when I was working on past investigations, there's a thread from 2023. It is titled, dryly, Custodian. The author of the thread, a person under the nickname Cold Archive, introduced himself as a former employee of an analytical company that worked on contracts with American agencies. He wrote rarely and briefly, but I reread one of his messages 10 times. "You're all looking for the owner," he wrote, "but you should be looking for the custodian. Those are different professions." The theory that has been pieced together for years on such forums sounds like this: Satoshi's keys have not belonged to Satoshi for a long time. Either he handed them over to a third party himself, voluntarily, just as he handed Gavin the key to the alert system, or they were taken, and the primary candidate for the custodian is the American intelligence apparatus. Does that sound like paranoid delusion? Wait before you turn this off. This delusion has a foundation of documents, and the foundation is uncomfortably solid. Document 1, June 1996. The National Security Agency of the United States publishes a study titled "How to Make a Mint: The Cryptography of Anonymous Electronic Cash." 18 pages where, 12 years before Satoshi's white paper, the architecture of an anonymous digital currency based on cryptographic signatures is described. The authors are staff mathematicians at the NSA, and now, the detail that makes forum archaeologists' hands tremble. The list of sources for this work includes the Japanese cryptographer Tatsuaki Okamoto, Satoshi Nakamoto. I am not drawing conclusions. I am simply reading the bibliography. Document 2, Bitcoin itself. Its heart, the SHA-256 hashing algorithm, was developed and published by the same National Security Agency in 2001. That is to say, the machine that was supposed to liberate the world from state control over money is built around a component forged in the smithy of American signals intelligence. This is something they don't like to mention at crypto conferences. I will speak separately about a theory I've been asked about in the comments for years. The one regarding DARPA, the Pentagon's research agency. There are no direct documents linking the agency to Bitcoin. I have looked, but the logic laid out by proponents of this theory deserves to be heard. For decades, DARPA has operated on a single pattern: create a technology, release it into the world, and watch what grows. That is how the internet was born. A military network handed over to civilians. That is how Tor was born. A naval laboratory project that became an anonymous network for the entire planet. Anonymous money in this sequence looks not like an exception, but like a logical third step. First, a free network, then anonymous communication, then uncontrollable money, a complete set of infrastructure that cannot be shut down. And every time, the creator steps aside, because the tool only works as long as it looks like it belongs to no one. And the third point, the timing of the dates. The creator hands over the control keys, writes, "Yuck, I have moved on to other things," and dissolves into thin air in the same weeks that his successor is packing a suitcase for a briefing in Langley. On that same closed forum, a person under the Handle Cold archive formulated it in one sentence, which I will quote as is: "You don't abandon a project a week before meeting the client, you deliver it." How does this work in the dead hand version? Simple. The keys lie in a vault, at an agency, a foundation, or with a trustee. You cannot touch the coins. Any movement would destroy the legend of an independent Bitcoin and crash the market, in which pension funds and entire nations are now invested. Satoshi's million coins in this version are not wealth. They're a kill switch that even the owner is afraid to flip. The perfect weapon of deterrence. As long as it lies there, it works. A beautiful theory. Coherent. It explains the silence. It has only one problem. It is just as unprovable as it is irrefutable. So, let me show you the second version. The one that, to be honest, I find more believable. And I will start it with a number that changes everything. 1979. 30 years before Bitcoin, cryptographer Adi Shamir, the very letter S in the RSA algorithm acronym, published a secret sharing scheme. The idea is brilliantly simple. Any key can be mathematically cut into several parts and distributed to different people. To reassemble the key, you need a quorum, say 3 parts out of 5. 2 parts or 4 parts individually are just a useless set of numbers. The key exists only at the moment when the holders of the parts gather together and reach an agreement. Now apply this scheme to Satoshi's main oddity. Linguists who analyzed his texts spent years stumbling over the same thing. He wrote sometimes in British English, sometimes in American, sometimes color with a U, sometimes without. In the code, one style; in the emails, another; in the white paper, a third. He replied on the forum at any time of day, and his activity schedule did not align with any time zone on the planet. A lonely genius who never sleeps and constantly gets confused by his own spelling, or several people behind one mask. A precedent for such a team existed. In the 90s and 2000s, a group of cryptographers and activists who called themselves cypherpunks were purposefully building anonymous money. Project after project, attempt after attempt. E-gold, Hashcash, B-money, BitGold. Every brick of Bitcoin's future was laid by someone from this narrow circle. All the candidates for Satoshi that investigators have been sifting through for 15 years come from this list. So, perhaps the truth is not in which one of them is Satoshi, but in the fact that the word which is unnecessary here. And if Satoshi is 3, 4, or 5 people who divided the master key according to Shamir's scheme, then the silence of the coins is explained without any mysticism. The quorum no longer gathers. Someone died, and their part of the key died with them. Hal Finney, the recipient of the first transaction and the first candidate for participation in any version of a collective Satoshi, passed away in 2014 from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. His body is frozen in a cryo facility in Arizona, waiting for a technology that might one day be able to revive him. I understand how this sounds, but it is a documented fact. The man who held the first Satoshi coins in his hands is lying in liquid nitrogen, and if he had a part of the key, it is frozen in ice along with him. Or maybe no one died. Maybe they just reached an agreement. On an old cypherpunk-style forum, I found a post from 2019 by a user signed Genesis Witness. He claimed to have known 2 of the Nakamoto group personally, and described their agreement in one line: the coins will move only when everyone agrees, and everyone will never agree. It's impossible to verify this, but think about the structure. If a key is divided, then the immobility of the coins is not someone's decision. It is an eternal deadlock of negotiations built into the very mathematics. The most secure safe is the one that no one can open alone, including the owners. For 16 years, these versions could be discussed as a parlor game. The Langley Keeper, the Dead Hand, the Split Key, the Secret Frozen in Ice. Take your pick. No one will ever check anyway. All these theories share one quiet assumption: the coins cannot be touched without the keys. What difference does it make who has them if you can't do anything without them? Well, that assumption is dead. On February 11th, 2026, a document appeared in the main Bitcoin repository that, for the first time in history, prepares the network for an adversary that does not need keys at all. The clock has started. On April 24th, 2026, an independent researcher named Giancarlo Lelli cracked a cryptographic key of the same type that protects every Bitcoin wallet on the planet. He didn't crack it with a supercomputer, a stolen password, or a code vulnerability. He used a quantum machine, access to which anyone can rent over the internet. For this, the company Project 11, which studies quantum threats, paid him the announced bounty, 1 Bitcoin, about $78,000. Let me cool down the hotheads immediately. The key was a toy, 15 bits long. Real Bitcoin keys are 256 bits, and the gap between these numbers is not 17 times, but astronomical. Today's quantum machines won't crack a real wallet in a year or even 100 years. Can we exhale? Don't rush. The number isn't what matters. The trajectory is what matters. 5 years ago, Cracking even a toy elliptic curve key with quantum hardware was science fiction. Now, a lone individual has done it on rented equipment, and throughout 2026, this trajectory is curving sharply upward. Look at the chronology of the last few months. In March, studies from Caltech and Google were released. Quantum machines are approaching the danger line faster than all forecasts predicted. Artificial intelligence has learned to fix their main ailment: calculation errors. Bitcoin security specialists have published a probability estimate for the first time, a 1 in 10 chance that a quantum computer will extract a private key from a wallet by as early as 2032. At the same time, Google announced it is moving its entire infrastructure to post-quantum encryption by 2029. Think about it. A corporation that has the best quantum laboratories in the world has set itself a deadline. In 3 years. When a bomb shelter builder sets a date, it is worth asking what they know about the weather. There are skeptics, and significant ones at that. Adam Back, a living legend of the cypherpunks and one of the eternal candidates for Satoshi, publicly insists that the real threat is 20 or even 40 years away, and the current panic is overblown. Maybe so, but Bitcoin itself decided not to check. On February 11th, 2026, document number 360 was accepted into the network's official repository, the first quantum-resistant address type in history. For 16 years, the quantum threat in the crypto world was laughed at. Now the foundation is being rewritten to accommodate it. And now, why all of this is directly related to our investigation. The fact is that the quantum threat is distributed unfairly. It does not hit all coins equally. For a quantum machine to crack a wallet, it needs a starting point, a public key. In modern addresses, it is hidden behind hashing and is only revealed at the moment of spending. If you hold coins on a fresh address and do not touch them, a quantum hacker has nothing to grab onto. But that was not always the case. The very first Bitcoin format, used in 2009 and 2010, printed public keys directly into the blockchain. In plain text, forever. You already understand whose coins those are. Practically the entire Satoshi million lies in that very ancient format. 22,000 addresses of the Satoshi pattern have been flashing their public keys to the whole world for 16 years. It is just that until now, there was no power capable of turning a public key into a private one. Project 11 analysts calculated the total size of the vulnerable zone, about 6,900,000 coins with exposed keys, a third of all existing Bitcoin, hundreds of billions of dollars. And the fattest piece of that zone is the creator's hoard. For ordinary coins, the recipe for salvation is ready. The new standard allows moving to quantum-resistant addresses. One move, and you're safe. A tiny formality. Only the owner of the keys can sign the move. A system built on the principle of your keys, your coins, does not provide for the rescue of someone else's property. No one, not the developers, not the miners, not the entire community in chorus, can move Satoshi's coins to a safe zone. Only he can do that. And he has been silent for 16 years. Remember the 50 coins of the Genesis block that Satoshi walled off so that no one could ever spend them? Back then, it looked like a beautiful gesture. Now, his entire million is standing in line at that same display case. Money that everyone can see and no one can touch. With one caveat. Soon, someone will appear who can. And this is where the Bitcoin community fractured in a way it never has in its entire history. In April, a group of developers led by the renowned researcher Jameson Lopp introduced proposal number 361. The core of it sounds like heresy. Freeze quantum vulnerable coins. Forbid the network from accepting transactions from old formats after a certain point. Simply put, block Satoshi's wallets forever. To keep them from a quantum thief, take them away from everyone, including the owner. The proponent camp says there's no other way. If one morning a quantum machine starts dumping the founder's million coins onto exchanges, a multi-trillion-dollar market will die in hours. Freezing is the lesser of two evils. The opposition camp replies, you're proposing to kill Bitcoin to save it. Confiscating someone else's coins by vote is exactly what Satoshi built defenses against. Do this once, and the entire idea of not your keys, not your coins turns to dust. For 16 years, humanity has argued over who owns Satoshi's coins. Now, it is voting on whether he has the right to own them. In absentia, without a defendant. And when I finished reading the records of these disputes, the final piece clicked into place, the one worth making this video for. All this time, we've been asking the question, who controls Satoshi's wallets? A custodian from Langley? A group with a split key? A dead man? A ghost? I went through every version, and only at the very end did I realize that the error is baked into the question itself. No one controls these wallets, and that is exactly what controls them. Look, for 16 years, Satoshi's stationary million has served as the load-bearing wall of the entire crypto economy. 5% of all coins are removed from circulation. That is the built-in scarcity that supports the price. A creator who hasn't sold a single coin is the myth of pure intent upon which trust is built. Everyone who buys Bitcoin, from a teenager with $100 to a pension fund with billions, is unconsciously betting that this wall will not budge. These funds themselves have long since ceased to be money. They have become the foundation beneath everyone else's trillions. And now put it all together. If the keys are with intelligence agencies, they cannot use them. Moving the coins would crash the market and bury the legend. If the keys are split among people, a quorum will never be reached. If the keys are lost, even more so. Every version from our investigation ends the same way. The coins must not move, no matter who holds them. Stasis is not the mystery of this story. Stasis is the solution. Satoshi, whoever he was, built a system where his own fortune could exist in only one form, the form of silence. But this structure has just gained an adversary that doesn't care about balance. A quantum machine doesn't need the consent of custodians, a group quorum, or the will of a ghost. It only needs a public key, and that has been hanging on the blockchain since 2009. And that is why the question we started with has become obsolete before our eyes. The question is no longer who owns Satoshi's keys. The question is, what happens on the day when keys are no longer needed? Humanity has, by various estimates, between 3 and 30 years to find an answer. The clock is already ticking. And for now, the wall still stands. My name is Mr. Dark Web. Let me know in the comments whose side you're on. Freeze the creators' coins, or let the future take them first. Right now, nearly $100 billion in Bitcoin sits in abandoned wallets. They haven't moved in 15 years. These Bitcoins belong to Satoshi Nakamoto, a name everyone knows, yet no one truly knows. In October of 2024, HBO released a film claiming to have unmasked Satoshi, but just a month ago, the New York Times named an entirely different person. Between these two investigations, 1.5 years, millions of dollars spent, and zero actual proof. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today we find out why the world's best investigators will never find him, and why that is the best case scenario for the entire world. I started digging into this back in March. I just wanted to break down the fresh New York Times investigation. It came out on April 8th, 2026, and it blew up the crypto community. But the deeper I went into the archives, the less I cared about the question of who is Satoshi. Another question took its place, a much more terrifying one. Why has he been silent for 15 years? December 12th, 2010. Satoshi Nakamoto writes his final public message. Post number 575 on the Bitcoin Talk forum. Technical, dry, no goodbyes. The next day, he logs onto the forum one last time. He doesn't write anything. He just logs in and vanishes. 4 months later, on April 23, 2011, developer Mike Hearn receives a private email from him. This would be the last known message from Satoshi, ever. It contains only 2 thoughts: "I've moved on to other things," and "Bitcoin is in good hands with Gavin and the rest." Gavin is Gavin Anderson, the programmer to whom Satoshi had transferred the cryptographic keys to the network's alert system just days before the email. Administrator writes over his own invention. Satoshi didn't just leave, he left a will. And here's what caught my attention. He didn't leave at a random moment. 2 days before his final post, PC World magazine published a major article. WikiLeaks has stirred the hornet's nest. It was about Julian Assange's organization, which, after being cut off by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal, announced they were now accepting Bitcoin. That was the moment. An obscure cryptocurrency for geeks and cypherpunks suddenly turned into a tool against the American government. 2 days after that article, Satoshi wrote on the forum, "WikiLeaks has kicked the hornet's nest. The swarm is heading towards us." He begged Assange not to use Bitcoin. The network wasn't ready. The network was too small. It wouldn't withstand the attention that was about to come. The attention of intelligence agencies, the attention of governments, the attention of those who know how to show up at 3 a.m. A couple of weeks later, Satoshi wrote to Gavin, asking him to stop calling him a mysterious figure. He asked to shift the focus to open source, to the community, to the code, to anything but his own persona. And then he disappeared. I thought it was a coincidence, fatigue, a new project, until I looked at the numbers. At the time of his disappearance, Satoshi had accumulated between 900,000 and 1,125,000 bitcoins in his wallets, coins mined in the first months of the network's existence, when they were worth literally nothing. Today, that is nearly $100 billion. $100 billion, and not a single one has moved. Not one transaction in 15 years. Not a single signed message proving those wallets are his. Even when they call one person after another, Satoshi. First HBO, then the New York Times. This isn't indifference. This is fear. This is an escape from something Satoshi saw coming. What did he see? I didn't find the answer in forum archives, not in emails. I found it in the fates of those whom journalists mistakenly took for Satoshi. Those who suffered all the consequences, but didn't receive a single coin. March 6th, 2014. An elderly engineer from Temple City, California, walked out of his house to check the mail. 12 journalists were standing on his lawn. They had arrived because that was the day the latest issue of the American magazine Newsweek hit the stands, with his face on the cover and the caption, "The face behind Bitcoin." A few hours later, a strange procession was driving down the Los Angeles highway. One car in front, an Associated Press journalist with a man in the passenger seat. 2 cars behind, reporters from other outlets joining the chase. A slow, humiliating chase, broadcast live on American television. The man in the seat was Dorian Prentice Satoshi Nakamoto, 64 years old, an unemployed engineer, a model train enthusiast, and his only connection to Bitcoin. His parents named him that in Japan in 1949, and the journalist who wrote the article was sitting in her office at that moment, watching the chase on the news. Her name was Leah McGrath Goodman. Her piece launched the era of the hunt for Satoshi Nakamoto, an era in which people suffered who had never written a single line of code for Bitcoin. And Dorian is not the worst case. There was another, much worse, a man who was dying of an incurable disease, right at the moment when a SWAT team broke into his home. Dorian Nakamoto, March 6th, 2014, 12 journalists on his lawn. That was only the beginning. The Newsweek article was built on a single phrase. Journalist Leah McGrath Goodman approached Dorian at his home and asked a direct question about Bitcoin. He replied, as she claims, verbatim, "I am no longer involved in that and I can't discuss it. It's been turned over to other people. They're in charge of it now." That was enough for his photo to appear on the cover of a reputable American magazine with the caption, "The face behind Bitcoin." Only later did Dorian explain that he wasn't talking about Bitcoin. He was talking about his previous secret work for military and defense contractors, which he was contractually forbidden to discuss. He had heard of Bitcoin for the first time that very morning when journalists besieged his home, but it was too late. The machine had started. His house was staked out. His car was followed. His phone was ringing off the hook. His mother, 88 years old, at one point decided the authorities wanted to take her to a nursing home because she couldn't understand who all these people were or why they were there. His wife and children, whom he hadn't spoken to in years, grew even more distant because the article portrayed their family in a way they didn't recognize. Dorian sued Newsweek. He launched the site Newsweek Lied. He raised money for lawyers through crowdfunding. A 64-year-old engineer who had spent his life designing classified systems for the American military became a public target because of one journalistic error. And now, the most terrifying part. That same March of 2014, a few kilometers from Dorian's house, in the city of Santa Barbara, another man was slowly dying. His name was Hal Finney, 58 years old. And unlike Dorian, he actually had a connection to Bitcoin. Hal was a legend, a co-founder of PGP Corporation, the developer of reusable proof-of-work technology in 2004, one of the first members of the cypherpunk movement. He was the first person after Satoshi to download and run Bitcoin, and he received the very first transaction in the network's history, 10 Bitcoins from Satoshi Nakamoto personally, January 12th, 2009, and he was dying. In 2009, he was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, the same one Stephen Hawking had, a progressive destruction of the nerve cells responsible for movement. The body turns into a prison, while the mind remains perfectly clear. By 2014, Hal could no longer move. A device tracking his eye movements helped him speak, and it was at this exact moment that journalists around the world decided that he was Satoshi Nakamoto. Their logic was understandable. Hal was one of the few people in the world who had the skills, the ideas, and the motivation to create Bitcoin. He lived literally 2 miles from Dorian Nakamoto, which spawned the theory that Hal took the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto in honor of his neighbor. He was among the first to respond to the white paper. He worked with Satoshi on the code in the earliest days. Journalists began arriving at the dying man's home, calling him, writing letters, demanding answers, and then what in America is called swatting happened. Someone calls the police and reports a fake hostage situation at someone else's address. Armed SWAT teams arrive at the house and kick down the door. Innocent people have died in the US this way several times. Well, Hal Finney was swatted, a paralyzed man who couldn't get out of bed. Armed police arrived at his home, and alongside this, blackmail. Strangers wrote to him and his wife Fran, demanding money, making threats. The blackmailers thought Hal was sitting on $1 billion and just pretending to be sick. Hal Finney died on August 28, 2014. At his own request, his body was frozen in a cryogenic chamber at the Alcor company in Arizona. He believed until the end that technology would one day be able to bring him back. Was Hal Finney Satoshi Nakamoto? No one could ever prove it. Text analysis shows that his writing style differed from Satoshi's. His wife maintains that he didn't leave the family a $1 billion fortune. Most cryptographers today are convinced that Hal was just himself, not Satoshi. But that doesn't matter anymore, because the hunting system doesn't run on evidence. It runs on suspicion. The next one was Nick Szabo. Szabo is another legend, a programmer and a lawyer at the same time. The man who, back in 1998, described the concept of BitGold, a digital currency that many today consider the direct predecessor to Bitcoin. A cryptographer, linguist, philosopher, one of the most reclusive people in this community. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't appear at conferences. He doesn't show his face. His reclusiveness made him the perfect target. In 2015, New York Times journalist Nathaniel Popper published a major piece. Nick Szabo is the most likely candidate for the role of Satoshi. The evidence, linguistic analysis, stylistic similarities, timing coincidences, the same interests, the same academic background. His initials, NS, are the reversed SN of Satoshi Nakamoto, 10 years under the microscope. Every word he wrote was run through authorship detection software. Every interview was picked apart by linguists. Every speech was compared to the Bitcoin white paper. Szabo denies it, firmly, consistently. But in this story, who cares about denials? The fourth case, the dirtiest one, Craig Wright, an Australian entrepreneur. In 2016, he publicly claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto. And he didn't just claim it, he tried to prove it. He brought forward some supposed cryptographic signatures. He gave interviews to the BBC, The Economist, and GQ. Very quickly, these signatures were picked apart and proven to be either forgeries or completely meaningless. Wright began dragging a dead man into this story, David Kleiman. Kleiman was a digital forensics expert, a specialist in computer security. He did indeed work with Wright on some projects. In 2003, he was in a car accident that left him paralyzed. He spent his final years in a wheelchair, suffering from infections and pain. He died in 2013, completely alone, in a room that no one checked for several days. His body was found only because of the smell. And this is the man Craig Wright began presenting as his partner in creating Bitcoin. David's brother, Ira Kleiman, sued Wright. He demanded half of those very Satoshi Bitcoins, on the grounds that his late brother was allegedly a co-author. The trial dragged on for years. Wright was ordered to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and in 2024, the British High Court officially ruled Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto. He never was. He lied systematically. He forged documents. He was found in contempt of court. The imposter spent nearly 10 years destroying lives around him, just to be someone he was not. And the final case, the most recent one, October 8th, 2024, the documentary Money Electric, The Bitcoin Mystery, is released on the streaming platform HBO Max. The director is Cullen Hoback, the same man who, 4 years earlier, directed Q Into the Storm, about the person hiding behind the QAnon movement. In the final scene, Hoback approaches a man and says to his face, "I think you are Satoshi." The man was Peter Todd, a Canadian programmer, one of the most respected developers in the Bitcoin community. In 2008, when Satoshi's white paper was published, he was 23. Todd claims he only became actively involved in development in 2013, 2 years after Satoshi disappeared. Hoback's evidence? A single forum post from 2010, in which, according to the director, Todd forgot to switch accounts and continued speaking as Satoshi, plus linguistic coincidences and proximity to Adam Back. That's all. Todd denied it that same day. He wrote to CoinDesk that Hoback was grasping at straws, that he had not consented to such a twist in the film, that he thought the film would be about the history of Bitcoin as a whole, not about his personal identity. But the internet had already exploded. A wave of unwanted attention crashed down on Todd. Threats, financial demands, hints that he was sitting on $1 billion in Bitcoin. 2 weeks later, Wired reported Todd had gone into hiding. He later partially denied it, saying he had appeared at a conference, but the fact remains. His life after that film was never the same. 6 cases, 6 failures. Dorian, Finney, Szabo, Wright, Kleiman, Todd. Not a single piece of real evidence. Only circumstantial clues, linguistics and chronology, guesses presented as facts, and every single time, real victims. All these people became victims, not of Satoshi, but of those who are hunting him. And here's the question that has haunted me from the very beginning. Who are these people? What drives them? Fame, money, professional curiosity, or something darker? I spent several weeks studying the motivations of those who have dedicated years to hunting Satoshi, and one of them, for the first time in my practice, agreed to speak with me, off the record, not for broadcast, just to explain how it works. What he said changed my understanding of this story. In April of this year, a man replied to my email. I will not name him. That was the condition. He's been working in the investigative industry for nearly 20 years. He has ties to one of the major American publications, and he told me a phrase that I wrote down word for word. We are not hunting a man. We are hunting a ghost, and that is exactly why it is so interesting. I spoke with him for about an hour and a half through a secure app. No recording, no photos. A man who hunts others knows how he is being hunted. Satoshi hunters fall into 4 categories, and each has its own price. The first category, investigative journalists. Those who see Satoshi as the greatest unsolved mystery of the modern internet. Leah McGrath Goodman, the very woman who wrote the Newsweek article in 2014. Before that, she was a serious financial journalist. She won awards. She was respected. After the article about Dorian, her reputation collapsed. She defended her material for years. She claimed that Dorian said exactly what he said, that the quote was authentic, that she was simply misunderstood. But the fact remained. The man she pointed her finger at went through hell, and she offered nothing as evidence except his name and one ambiguous phrase. Nathaniel Popper of the New York Times followed the same path in 2015. He named Nick Szabo. Popper acted more subtly. He didn't say, "This is definitely him." He said, "Here's strong circumstantial evidence," but the effect was the same. Szabo retreated even further into the shadows. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped appearing anywhere in public. John Carreyrou, the most prominent figure in this category, the very journalist who, in 2015, exposed Elizabeth Holmes and the company Theranos. The cost of the scam, $9 billion. Carreyrou's book, Bad Blood, became a bestseller. It was turned into a series. Carreyrou received a Pulitzer Prize, and now, in 2025 to 26, this man, America's best investigative journalist, spent 2 years searching for Satoshi, with a serious budget, with a team, with an AI expert named Dylan Friedman, who analyzed texts using machine learning. And in April, he published a 10,000-word piece in the New York Times. What he concluded, I will tell you in the finale of this story, but looking ahead, I will say one thing. Even Carreyrou could not provide a definitive answer, only a theory. The second category, documentarians. Here, Cullen Hoback is king and god. Hoback is a director with a signature style. In 2021, he made the series Q Into the Storm for HBO, 6 episodes, 3 years of investigation. In the finale, the director pointed directly at a man named Ron Watkins and said to his face, "It's you." There was a scandal. Watkins denied it. There was plenty of evidence, but it was all circumstantial. After QAnon, Hoback became a documentary superstar. Adam McKay, the director of The Big Short about the financial crisis, became the executive producer of Hoback's next project. That project was Money Electric. Hoback's logic was clear. If he could find the leader of QAnon, he could find Satoshi. The same methodology, the same style, the same final scene in which the director shows the accused, "I think it's you." Only in Satoshi's case, there was even less evidence than with QAnon. And the victim, Peter Todd, didn't even try to make excuses. He just said that Hoback was grasping at straws, and he went into the shadows. The third category, academic researchers. This is a different world. They don't hunt for money or fame. They hunt for the sake of a scientific problem. Stefan Thomas, a Swiss programmer. In 2013, he analyzed all 575 of Satoshi's forum posts. He plotted them by time of publication, and he discovered a sharp drop in activity between 5 and 11 in the morning Greenwich Mean Time. This corresponded to the night in the Eastern Time Zone of the United States. The conclusion: Satoshi most likely lived on the American East Coast, not in Japan, as his name implied. Alyssa Blackburn from Aiden Lab went further. She analyzed the very first Bitcoin transactions, those from the first months of the network's existence, and she discovered that only 64 people were actively mining during that period. Not thousands, not hundreds, 64. And one of these people, according to her data, had a behavioral pattern that overlapped with Hal Finney's pattern. This was scientific work, with math, with statistics, without sensationalism. And that's exactly why it proved to be the most dangerous for Satoshi's private life, because a scientific approach yields results that people believe. The fourth category, the darkest and the most numerous. These are people who hunt not for an article or a film. They hunt for themselves. Blockchain analysts, private investigators, Satoshi Bitcoin hunters. We will look at them in more detail later, but I will say one thing. My contact, the very journalist who agreed to speak with me, mentioned them with a specific tone. Journalists are dangerous because they are stupid, he said. But these are dangerous because they are precise. I asked him directly. Why doesn't he stop himself? Why does he keep digging? His answer threw me off balance. He said, because if I find him, it will be more or less clean. But if they find him, that person will die. I listened and realized this was self-deception. Dangerous, convenient. Because the moment an article hits the front page, you can no longer protect anyone. The name becomes public. The address becomes public. And those who know how to come for data will come. At the end of our conversation, I asked him one last question. What will happen if Satoshi is actually found? He was silent for about 5 seconds. Then he said quietly, then we will all see what the greatest crime of the century looks like. He didn't elaborate, but I already knew the answer. 1 million bitcoins is the biggest target in the history of organized crime, and people are killed for that kind of money every week, all over the world. January 21st, 2025. The small town of Marot in central France. Around 6 in the morning, armed men break into the home of Ledger co-founder David Balland. Balland is one of the most famous people in the crypto industry. Ledger is the company that makes hardware wallets for storing Bitcoin. Their products sit on store shelves all over the world. Balland himself is a millionaire, a well-known face, a frequent guest at crypto conferences, and it was he and his wife who were kidnapped that morning. The criminals took them to an unknown location. Then they separated them. The wife was held in one place, Balland himself in another. For 24 hours, they disappeared from the radar, and then the family received a ransom demand, 10 million euros in Bitcoin, immediately. The French police moved in immediately. It was one of the most high-profile kidnappings in French history in decades. Special forces joined the investigation. Eventually, they found Balland, but not in one piece. To prove they were serious, the criminals cut off his finger and sent it as proof. His wife was found separately, in the trunk of a car, alive. In June of that same year, French police arrested the mastermind, a French citizen of Moroccan descent. According to the investigation, this same group was behind several other kidnappings of crypto holders in France that same spring. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was an epidemic. According to the blockchain security firm Certiquet, in the year 2024, 41 so-called wrench attacks were recorded worldwide. It's a term from the crypto community. Literally, an attack using a wrench. The idea is that you don't need to crack cryptography hundreds of bits long if you can just hit a person with a wrench until they give up their password. In the year 2025, those attacks rose to 72, a 75% increase in just 1 year. And those are only the ones we know about. Experts estimate the real number is at least 2 to 3 times higher. Most victims prefer to stay silent, out of shame, out of fear of a repeat, out of threats to their families, out of a refusal to admit how much Bitcoin they actually held. It gets worse. May 25th, 2025, New York, Manhattan. 2 men enter an apartment in the city center. They come for an Italian crypto holder who arrived in the United States on business. These 2 torture him for nearly 3 days, with tasers, with threats, no sleep, no food. The goal, to force him to hand over access to his wallets. He escaped. By some miracle, he managed to get away from his captors and run to a police station. The 2 were detained. This case made major waves in American news because, as it turned out, they had held other people in that apartment before the Italian. It was in essence a domestic concentration camp for crypto investors. Elena Vranova, co-founder of Satoshi Labs, the company that makes the popular Trezor hardware wallets, said one sentence in August that made its way through every crypto publication. I will quote her verbatim. "Every week, at least one Bitcoiner in the world is kidnapped, tortured, or blackmailed. Sometimes worse. Sometimes worse means murder. In the year 2025, there were more of these than in all previous years combined. But the most terrifying case didn't happen in Europe or the United States. It happened in Canada, in the province of British Columbia, in the year 2024. The case only broke in the autumn of 2025 when the verdict was handed down. The family lived in a typical suburban house. The husband worked in the crypto industry. He held significant assets. As it turned out later, the criminals found out about this from a data leak at one of the major exchanges. There have been several such leaks in recent years. 2 men arrived at the house in postal worker uniforms. With a package that looked ordinary, the owner opened the door. They walked in. They immediately opened the door for 2 more accomplices who were waiting outside. 4 grown men against a family with 1 child. I will describe what happened next as briefly as I can. Not because I don't know the details, but because I don't want to recount them. The husband and wife were waterboarded. That is the simulation of drowning, a method the CIA used against Guantanamo detainees. They threatened to cut off body parts. They did this in front of the child, to add pressure, and then they turned their attention to the daughter. They forced her to do things I will not describe. They filmed it, to use as additional leverage later. So the parents would know these videos could be published. They gained access to the wallets. They drained about $1,600,000. It was almost everything the family had. They were caught. They were convicted. This case became one of those that sparked a serious discussion across the global crypto community about whether it is even possible to safely own Bitcoin if you have a family. Now, imagine you don't have 1.6 million in your wallets. Imagine you have nearly 100 billion on 2 wallets sitting on an open blockchain. Anyone can see how much money is there. That is Satoshi Nakamoto, the most expensive target in the history of organized crime. No police force in the world guards that much money for one person. No bank holds that much in a single client's account. And here, 1,125,000 Bitcoins in open access. Everyone knows the sum. No one knows who he is. If Satoshi's name becomes public tomorrow, what happened to Baland will look like child's play. It won't be just one group of kidnappers arriving at such a person's house. There will be dozens, cartels, criminal syndicates, intelligence agencies of hostile states, just desperate people, and no one will be able to protect him. I spoke with an expert from a private firm that specializes in protecting crypto millionaires. He said one thing that struck me. Crypto-rich individuals with a net worth of 100 to 200 million have a level of protection today comparable to high-ranking politicians. Armored cars, constant security, hidden real estate ownership. But Satoshi, he said, is a different level. He cannot be protected at all. Too much money, too many people who want it. And here I come to what worries me the most. Wrench attacks are dangerous. Kidnappings are dangerous. The Canadian case is horrifying. But these are all lone wolf criminals. They can be caught, put in prison. You can fight them because they operate outside the law. There are hunters who are far more dangerous. Those who operate within the law. Those who have badges, warrants, budgets, and legal protection. Those who never give up. Those who will outlive any individual because they are institutions, not people, states. June 28th, 2011. New York Senator Charles Schumer goes to the press with a statement. He demands that federal authorities shut down one website. The site is called Silk Road, a marketplace on the Darknet where you can buy drugs for Bitcoin. From that moment on, the American government officially recognizes the existence of Bitcoin for the first time and immediately declares war on it. 2 weeks after Schumer's statement, Satoshi stopped answering emails. 4 months later, he disappeared forever. That might be a coincidence, or maybe not, because Satoshi had already seen what happens to those who create alternative currencies. Bernard von Nothaus, the creator of the Liberty Dollar, a private currency backed by silver, which he began issuing in the United States back in 1998. In 2007, the FBI conducted a raid. In 2011, the trial. In 2014, von Nothaus was sentenced. 6 months probation for creating a private currency competing with the dollar. The prosecutor at the trial called him a domestic terrorist for silver coins with the word liberty on them. He was 67 years old at the time of the sentencing. Ross Ulbricht, the creator of that very same Silk Road, 31 years old. In the year 2015, he was given 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Plus 40 years on top of that for creating an internet platform where other people bought drugs. For Bitcoin, 2 life sentences and 40 years. Without the right to a pardon. That is the leverage. That is what Satoshi understood in 2011. The state does not forgive the creators of alternative financial systems. Never. Now, imagine Satoshi is de-anonymized tomorrow. What happens? First, the Internal Revenue Service, the most inhumane institution in America. The tax on unrealized gains for 1,125,000 Bitcoins is tens of billions of dollars in federal and state tax debt just for owning the coins, with no way to pay because the coins are in wallets that cannot be touched without going public. Second, the Treasury Department, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. If Satoshi turns out not to be American, sanctions, asset freezes, a ban on any transactions under threat of criminal prosecution for anyone who works with him. Third, the Department of Justice. If it turns out that even one Satoshi was ever used for illegal activity, and hundreds of billions in the black economy have passed through the Bitcoin network over 15 years, Satoshi automatically becomes an accomplice under American law. Not because he did anything, but because he created the tool. Fourth, intelligence agencies. There is direct confirmation from Gavin Anderson himself that the CIA was interested in Bitcoin as early as 2011. He traveled to Langley in June of that year to give them a lecture. Satoshi found out about this, and a month later, he practically stopped communicating even with Gavin. That wasn't paranoia. That was understanding. And the scariest part is that states don't act alone. When Satoshi's name becomes public, it won't just be America that wants him. China, Russia, the European Union. Every major country will be interested in gaining control over 1 million Bitcoins, and each will use its own methods. Interrogation, coercion, threats to family, taxes, immigration manipulation, criminal charges for anything at all, from tax evasion to alleged support for terrorists. The state won't kill Satoshi. It will do something worse. It will turn his life into a prison from which there is no escape. A legal, financial, and social one. And that is exactly what Satoshi has been hiding from for 15 years. But in the year 2024, they finally tried to get to him. Not the state, journalists, and not just any. October 8th, 2024, the premiere of Money Electric, The Bitcoin Mystery on HBO Max. In the final scene, director Cullen Hoback stands before Canadian programmer Peter Todd and speaks his theory out loud. Todd laughs. He says, "I'm Satoshi, of course," ironically, mockingly. Hoback takes it as a confession. The camera captured the moment. A few hours after the premiere, the entire internet already knows the name. Hoback's evidence fits into a single sentence. In 2010, on the Bitcoin Talk forum, someone replied to a post by Satoshi. In Hoback's opinion, the reply continued Satoshi's own thought, meaning the person forgot to switch accounts. That person was Todd, and that is it. There's no other evidence in the film. Todd denies it that very same day. Hoback is grasping at straws. I did not give my consent. I thought the film was about the history of Bitcoin as a whole. It does not help. 2 weeks later, Wired publishes a piece stating that Todd has gone into hiding. He is receiving threats, financial demands, hints that he is sitting on $1 billion in Bitcoin. Todd partially refutes this, claiming he appeared at a conference. But the fact remains, his life after that film was never the same. HBO spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the investigation. They won an award for the documentary. And they were wrong. 1.5 years of silence. And then, April 8th, 2026, the New York Times publishes a 10,000-word piece. The author is John Carreyrou, the very same Carreyrou who, in 2015, exposed Elizabeth Holmes and the company Theranos, a $9 billion scam. Carreyrou's book, Bad Blood, is a bestseller, a series, a Pulitzer Prize winner. America's best investigative journalists spent 2 years on this, with a team, with AI expert Dylan Friedman, who analyzed the texts using machine learning, with a serious budget from the publication. And his name is Adam Back, a British cryptographer. The creator of Hashcash, a proof-of-work algorithm that Satoshi cites directly in the Bitcoin white paper. Back was one of the first members of the cypherpunk movement, and most importantly, in August of 2008, even before the publication of the white paper, Back received the first known email from Satoshi Nakamoto. He was the first person on the planet whom Satoshi contacted at all. Carreyrou's evidence? Linguistic analysis. Back and Satoshi write the same way. 2 spaces between sentences. British spellings of words. The same way of misusing hyphens. They cite the same obscure cryptographic papers from the 90s. They're active during the same hours. Carreyrou suggests some emails that researchers considered to be correspondence between Back and Satoshi were written by Back himself to create an alibi. That same day, Back denies it. No, I have said this many times already. Back's company, Blockstream, publishes a statement. Today's New York Times article is built on the circumstantial interpretation of selected details and speculation, not on cryptographic proof. Fortune magazine publishes a scathing piece. The headline, a purple, "Not so fast." It points out that Carreyrou bypassed a more obvious candidate, Nick Szabo, whose initials are the reversed initials of Satoshi, who wrote about digital currency 10 years before Bitcoin, whom Satoshi perhaps helped. The crypto community reacts harshly. Even those who admit that the evidence against Back is indeed strong refuse to accept the article as proof, because there is no proof in it. There are only coincidences, a great many coincidences, but no proof. And this is the main point. In 1.5 years, the 2 loudest journalistic investigations of recent years have named 2 different people. HBO, Peter Todd. The New York Times, Adam Back. America's best documentarian and America's best investigative journalist. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in budget, years of work, teams of experts, AI analysis, and they named different people. because neither of them had real evidence, only circumstantial clues, only linguistics and coincidences, only guesses presented as versions. This is the answer to the question I started this story with. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. No one will be able to prove it. And in that is his greatest victory. Satoshi voluntarily walked away from $100 billion, from fame, from a place in history books, from awards, from everything that usually drives people. He created the most important technology of the 21st century and left without taking a single cent. And everyone who tries to find him, journalist, documentarian, government, bandit, is trying to take away from him exactly what he did all of this for: the right to be invisible. I thought about this for a long time, and I realized Satoshi is not a riddle to be solved. He is an idea to be preserved. The idea that a person can create something great and not need recognition. That technology can be more important than the individual. That privacy is not a privilege, but a form of freedom. And that sometimes the best way to change the world is to disappear. If Satoshi is found tomorrow, it will not be a journalistic sensation. It will be the end of a very important story. A story that showed that one person can change the financial system of the planet and not pay for it with himself. Perhaps Satoshi is reading this right now, and I hope for only one thing: that he remains where he is. As always, your Mr. Dark Web.